hits black woman in public. His career ends. Seconds later. The late afternoon sun beat down on the cracked pavement of a strip mall parking lot in Cedarfield, a mid-sized town in southern Georgia. The kind of place where everyone claimed to know everyone, but where silence often said more than words ever could. Cars crawled past one another, mothers pulled their children along by the wrists, and the hum of casual suburban life filled the air. Tamara Bishop stepped out of her navy blue Toyota Corolla, the kind of car you buy when you're not trying to impress anyone, just trying to make it through the week. She had just come off a double shift at Mercy General Hospital, where she worked as a surgical assistant. Her navy scrubs clung to her skin with the weight of sweat and fatigue, but her mind was already on the gallon of milk and cold medicine she needed to grab before heading home to her mother, who'd caught a summer flu and refused to rest. Tamara adjusted her purse strap and locked the car with a beep. She walked with purpose toward the entrance of Marshall's, not noticing the black Chevy Tahoe idling several yards away. The driver, Officer Curtis Denton, had been watching her from the moment she pulled into the spot. A veteran of the Cedarfield Police Department, Curtis was off duty but in uniform. He claimed it made it easier to run errands if he had to cut lines or flash authority. Inside that Tahoe, his knuckles were white against the steering wheel. Tamara's crime. Nothing really, just existing, walking upright. Black, confident, exhausted, and still commanding the kind of presence that some men, especially men like Curtis Denton, interpreted as a challenge. The engine revved behind her, but Tamara didn't hear it until it screeched. She turned around instinctively, just as the Tahoe lunged forward and slammed to a halt inches from her thighs. A few heads in the lot turned. She froze, confused, then annoyed. The window rolled down. "You got no eyes, lady?" Curtis barked. Tamara blinked, her heart leaping but her voice calm. "Excuse me, that was my spot." "You zipped in like you own the place. I didn't see a turn signal. You weren't even parked." "That's not the damn point," Curtis said, voice louder now. "You people think rules don't apply to you." And there it was. Those two words, you people. They always came laced with a bitterness that decades of diversity training never washed out. Tamara squared her shoulders. "Sir, you're escalating something that doesn't need to be escalated. I parked, that's all." The uniform caught her eye fully now. The badge, the weapon at his waist, her breath caught for just a beat. Curtis opened the door and stepped out. A man walking into the store with his son stopped short and instinctively guided the boy in the other direction. A young woman in a red tank top pulled out her phone, slowly, already hitting record. "I should write you up right now for reckless driving," Curtis said, advancing. Entitled attitude, ignoring an officer. Tamara didn't move. Her voice dipped into warning. "You're off duty. You have no authority here." His eyes darkened. "Say that again." "I said you're not acting in any official capacity." "This is harassment, and I'm telling you, back." And before the last word left her lips, his hand shot out and slapped her. It landed square across the left side of her face, jerking her head violently sideways, the sting blooming immediately. A woman across the lot screamed. The phone camera caught everything. Tamara didn't cry out. She didn't even flinch again. Her eyes turned back slowly to meet his. She stared. 1 second, 2, 3. Then she said it. "You just ended your career." Curtis laughed, a dry, dismissive bark. "You gonna run and tell someone?" "No," a voice called from nearby. "We all saw it. And we're already live." Curtis spun toward the voice. The young woman with the phone was now surrounded by 3 more people filming. One of them, a man in a mechanic's jumpsuit, added, "You laid hands on her in uniform over a parking space." "You're done, man. Curtis turned back to Tamara, the confidence drained from his face inch by inch. "You," he started. Tamara held up her phone, camera pointed right at him. "Smile," she said quietly. "That's your last moment with a badge." Her cheek still burned, her head still rang, but she stood tall. Her chest rose and fell steadily as more shoppers approached, some filming, some asking if she was okay. One woman gently touched Tamara's arm. "Don't let him get away with it," she whispered. "We're all witnesses now." Curtis took a step back, realizing for the first time that there was no backdoor exit for him, no blue wall to hide behind, no quiet internal affairs cover-up. He had struck a black woman in broad daylight, in uniform, with dozens of witnesses and half a dozen camera phones trained on him. It was too late. His hand twitched, unsure whether to retreat or to reach for authority he no longer held. "You assaulted her!" someone shouted. "Arrest him!" another yelled, irony cutting through the air. Curtis looked around and, like a man waking from a dream, realized the world was now watching him, not as a cop, but as a threat. Tamara didn't say another word. She simply walked past him and into the store, hands still shaking, but not from fear, from fire. Inside the store, Tamara's heart was still racing, though she moved with the precision of someone who'd been through far worse and survived. Her cheek throbbed, a dull heat radiating outward from the spot where Curtis Denton's palm had struck. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the weight of it, the public humiliation, the fact that it had come from a man paid to protect people like her, but who looked at her and saw a target. But Tamara Bishop wasn't built to break. She reached for her phone with trembling fingers and opened the front camera. Her reflection stared back, a red mark across her cheek, already swelling. Her lips were tight, pressed together to hold back the scream rising in her chest, not from fear, but fury. She hit record. "My name is Tamara Bishop. I'm a surgical assistant at Mercy General. Today, at around 5:17 p.m., I was physically assaulted by a police officer in uniform, off-duty in a public parking lot. His name is Curtis Denton. There are witnesses. There is footage, and I am pressing charges." She ended the video, saved it to the cloud, and sent it in 3 directions: her sister, her best friend Natalie, and a private file on her encrypted drive. Then she took a long breath and walked toward the pharmacy section. Her mother still needed the cold medicine. As she turned the corner, a store employee, a young black man, no older than 20, looked up from restocking shelves. His eyes widened. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Tamara paused. "No," she said softly, "but I'm going to be." Back outside, things had escalated fast. Curtis stood by his SUV, phone to his ear. His face was pale now, lips tight. Whatever confidence he'd carried before had drained. He was arguing with someone, maybe dispatch, maybe a superior, but the growing circle of onlookers didn't care. One by one, the witnesses were giving statements. A Latina mother of 3, a retired Army vet in a ball cap, 2 teenagers with matching hoodies and cracked iPhones, each one telling the same story. The woman didn't raise her voice, didn't touch him. He struck her first. Cameras were rolling the whole time. A local news reporter had already arrived. Channel 7's van parked near the street. The camera was still off, but the reporter, Kelsey Ramirez, was taking notes furiously while listening to bystanders. Inside the store, Tamara finished quickly. She barely remembered the walk to the register, but the cashier, an older white woman, looked at her with a quiet kind of empathy, like she knew. She didn't ask questions, she just scanned, bagged, and whispered, "We saw it." "Good for you for standing tall." Tamara nodded, unable to say thank you without cracking. She stepped back outside, bag in hand. The light had shifted, the sun now dipping closer to the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. The crowd parted slightly as she walked back toward her car. Phones lifted again. Curtis turned, phone still in hand, just as she passed. "You should have just apologized," he muttered, venom in his tone. Tamara turned, slow and deliberate. "For what?" "Parking?" Curtis opened his mouth, but the crowd was no longer on his side. "Cameras are still rolling," someone said. "Try it again," another added. "You won't walk away this time." A beat passed. Curtis's jaw flexed. He turned back toward his SUV. Then came the moment no one expected. A second police cruiser pulled into the lot. Curtis stiffened. Officer Marissa Talbot stepped out, a young black woman in full CPD uniform. She scanned the scene quickly, professionally. Someone had clearly called it in. Her eyes locked on Tamara's face first, on the red swelling, and then swept to Curtis. She walked straight to him. "You Denton?" she asked. Curtis nodded. "I was handling the situation." She cut him off. "By putting your hands on a civilian?" "Watch yourself, officer," he snapped. "I've been on this force 20 years, and I've been on this planet long enough to recognize abuse of power when I see it," she shot back. Then, into her radio. "Unit 244 requesting supervisor and internal affairs dispatched to Marshall's parking lot. Possible officer-involved assault. Victim is present. Witnesses on scene. Cameras confirmed." Curtis went pale. "You don't call IA on a fellow officer without—" "I'm not your fellow anything right now," she said flatly. Tamara didn't speak. She stood, silent and steady, watching the entire thing unfold. Not with satisfaction. There was nothing satisfying about seeing a man collapse under the weight of his own actions. But there was clarity, a shift in the air. Curtis tried again. "She struck me back." Talbot raised an eyebrow. "After you hit her first?" "We've got half the town here saying you assaulted her without cause, and you did it in uniform. That's a wrap, sir." A pause. Curtis looked around, scanning the cameras, the reporters, the people. No blue wall behind him now, just witnesses. Just accountability. And then, as if on cue, his phone rang again. He answered. Said nothing, just listened. Then his shoulders sagged. He hung up, turned slowly toward Tamara, and said, "You're going to regret this." And she said, without blinking, "No, you are." Officer Talbot stepped closer. "Turner in your badge and weapon. Internal Affairs will take it from here." Curtis hesitated, then reached slowly to his belt. He unhooked his sidearm, removed his badge. Placed them on the hood of his SUV. The crowd went quiet. Tamara turned and got into her car. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear, from power. From having taken something back that so many people never get the chance to reclaim. As she drove away, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Natalie. "Girl, the video just hit Twitter. You're trending." Justice for Tamara. She didn't smile. Not yet, but she would. Tamara's apartment felt different that night. The same walls, same furniture, same skyline view from the 12th floor. But everything had shifted. The air felt heavier, tinged with adrenaline and something she hadn't felt in a long time, righteous anger that hadn't curdled into helplessness. She dropped her bag by the door and turned on the living room light. Her phone was still buzzing every few seconds. Mentions. DMs. News alerts. Natalie had been right. The video of her slap had gone viral. Only this time, it wasn't just a fleeting clip. It was a movement. She scrolled through the chaos. A local activist had already stitched the video with commentary. "This is what strength looks like. This is how you stand your ground." Another popular account wrote, "She didn't just survive, she responded, and that's what we need to protect." Under the trending hashtag #HadJusticeForTamara, strangers were posting in support. Black women sharing their own stories of abuse and fear, allies demanding Curtis Denton's badge, celebrities, low-level ones for now, tweeting solidarity. Then came the twist. A whistleblower account reposted the video, adding, "Breaking: Officer Curtis Denton has a history of excessive force complaints. Internal Affairs buried at least 2. More to come." Tamara froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She clicked into the thread. The post linked to an old blog from a legal nonprofit that tracked police misconduct. A name popped out: Luis Ortega, 23, arrested outside a bodega for loitering. Injuries included a fractured wrist and bruised ribs. The arresting officer, Curtis Denton, complaint filed. Closed with no follow-up. Then another, Shannon Wells, 44, mother of 2, accused of resisting arrest during a traffic stop. No video, but medical records showed lacerations and a dislocated shoulder. Officer listed Denton. Tamara leaned back into the couch, blood pounding in her ears. So this wasn't a one-off. Curtis had done this before, maybe not in public, maybe not caught on tape, but it wasn't new. And now the floodgates were opening. The door buzzed. She startled upright. Then crossed quickly to the intercom. "It's Natalie," came the voice, "and I brought wine. Also a backup charger, because your phone's gonna melt." Tamara buzzed her in. Minutes later, her best friend stepped through the door, oversized tote slung over her shoulder, eyes wide. "You?" "R.A. legend." Tamara raised an eyebrow. "I'm a trending hashtag." "You're a hero," Natalie countered, tossing her bag down. "Twitter's eating it up. They're saying you could have a lawsuit." Tamara blinked. "A lawsuit?" Natalie nodded. "Battery. Excessive force. Civil rights violation. And I know a guy, well, he knows a guy, who works with the ACLU." Tamara walked to the kitchen and pulled out 2 glasses. "I didn't slap him for a lawsuit. I slapped him because he hit me in front of 20 people and thought no one would care." "That's exactly why you file one," Natalie said, "to make sure people do care." Tamara poured the wine but didn't drink. Her mind was already racing ahead. She didn't want fame. She didn't want a payout. What she wanted, needed, was for people like Curtis to stop hiding behind a badge. For the next woman to not feel the heat of shame after being assaulted. For systems to crack open and finally breathe. But she also knew what came next. The smears, the doubt, the questions about her past, her attitude, her tone, how quickly the story would try to flip. "I need a lawyer," Tamara said quietly. Natalie looked up, surprised by the resolve in her tone. "I'll make calls." The next morning, Tamara was sipping bitter diner coffee across from Jordan Keene, a civil rights attorney who'd taken on the city's school board once and won. Jordan was a sharp-eyed black woman in her early 40s, no nonsense and with a reputation for precision over flair. She wore a dark blazer, a soft afro, and a look like she already knew what cards the other side held. "I've watched the footage," Jordan said. "Multiple angles. You've got a case. You've also got fire." "That's rare." Tamara blinked. "Fire?" Jordan leaned in. "You didn't cry. You didn't shrink, you responded. That will scare them more than any lawsuit." Tamara sipped her coffee. "I'm not trying to scare them." "No," Jordan said, "but you're about to." They talked for an hour. Jordan walked her through the legal process, filing, discovery, motions. Tamara would need to recount the story over and over. She'd be deposed, questioned, picked apart. Every text, every post, every decision she'd made would be scrutinized. But there was power in transparency, in not flinching. "Do you want to go public?" Jordan asked, eyes levels. "Press conferences? Interviews?" Tamara considered it. "Maybe, but not yet. I want them to make their move first. Jordan nodded. Smart. Then we move. By nightfall, the city had already started reacting. Curtis Denton had been placed on administrative leave without pay. The department released a vague statement. We take these matters seriously. A full investigation is underway, but it was too late for PR spin. That night, Channel 7 led with the headline, Officer Assaults Woman in Public. Community Demands Accountability. The footage aired. So did interviews from 3 witnesses, none of them related, all saying the same thing. And then came the final twist of the night. An anonymous email hit multiple newsrooms. Attached, a PDF file. Subject, Officer Curtis Denton, Internal Affairs Records. Leaked, real, unredacted. 5 prior complaints, all buried, all now in the public eye. Tamara stood in her apartment, TV flickering, phone buzzing, the city pulsing with outrage. Curtis Denton had slapped the wrong woman, and now his career wasn't just ending, it was unraveling in real time. The sun hadn't even crested over the downtown skyline when the headlines rolled in like a tidal wave. Curtis Denton, formerly just another name in the department, was now front-page news, but this time not as a decorated officer. Not as a man in uniform. He was a disgraced aggressor, exposed under a magnifying glass that finally refused to blink. Tamara stood in front of her bathroom mirror, toothbrush idle in her hand, phone screen glowing beside her with push notifications she no longer had the energy to read. Her reflection looked the same, but the world outside now saw her differently, not just as a woman, not just as black, but as someone who had dared to fight back and kept fighting after the camera stopped rolling. By mid-morning, Jordan Keene called. "We're filing today," she said without preamble. "The civil complaint is drafted, assault, violation of civil rights, and we're adding intentional infliction of emotional distress. I want to hit them where it hurts because Denton didn't just break protocol. He treated your humanity like it was disposable." Tamara nodded slowly, heart pounding. "And the department?" Jordan hesitated, then answered, "They've lawyered up. They'll try to claim he was off-duty, acting as a civilian. They'll push hard to disconnect themselves from liability." "But he flashed his badge," Tamara said, "right after he hit me." "I know," Jordan replied. And that's where they've already made their mistake. That afternoon the complaint went public. Tamara's name was front and center. Tamara Green versus Officer Curtis Denton and the City of Brookridge Police Department. It landed like a lightning strike. Cable networks picked it up. Legal analysts broke down every clause. Hashtags like #badge is not immunity and #stand with. Tamara spiked to trending within hours. Her face, once just another tired nurse in scrubs, now symbolized a storm no department could contain. But with that visibility came the next wave. Threats, doxing attempts, fake Twitter accounts accusing her of being hostile at work, of having a pattern of behavior. A video surfaced, years old, where Tamara was captured on camera calmly correcting a doctor who had misread a patient chart. It was twisted by detractors into insubordination. Jordan's team shut it down quickly, but it was a reminder. Truth wasn't enough. In this fight, perception was currency. That night, Curtis Denton broke his silence. In a calculated interview with a right-leaning local podcast, he sat in a neutral living room backdrop, no uniform, just a wounded man misunderstood. "She came at me," he said, voice measured but thinly veiled with bitterness. "I feared for my safety. It was chaos, and I reacted. I didn't mean to hit her. I've spent 20 years serving my city. This isn't who I am." The host nodded along sympathetically. Cancel culture doesn't care about context. Tamara watched the clip in silence, fists clenched. The performance was almost flawless, just enough regret to sound human, just enough vagueness to avoid responsibility, but the public wasn't buying it. The comment sections beneath the video were flooded with backlash. Did she punch you first? No. Sit down. You mean to tell me a nurse in scrubs scared a trained cop? And then, this man just realized his badge won't shield him from receipts. Still, damage control was underway. The union held a press conference the next morning, attempting to reframe the incident as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by social media. But then came the second twist. A second woman came forward. Her name was Carla Bennett. She was 41, a former EMT, and she had a story. In a press statement read by her attorney, she detailed an encounter from 2 years ago, a late-night fender bender, a uniformed Denton showing up on scene, accusing her of being combative, pushing her against her vehicle. No charges were filed, but the bruises lingered. Back then, she had been too scared to speak. But I saw Tamara stand her ground, she wrote in the statement, and I realized silence is a form of surrender. I won't surrender anymore. Tamara read the statement aloud, her hands trembling as she reached the end. Jordan, sitting across from her, leaned forward. This changes everything. If we can show a pattern, documented or not, it undercuts the entire isolated mistake defense. More women followed. Anonymous statements, old complaints, nothing had stuck until now. That evening, the mayor held an emergency press conference. Curtis Denton had been officially terminated from the Brookridge Police Department. The statement was terse. Final. This administration will not tolerate abuse of power, on or off duty. Mr. Denton's actions were inexcusable. Effective immediately, he is no longer employed by this department. When the camera cut to reporters, one question echoed loud and clear. What about the others? Back in her apartment, Tamara sat by the window, watching the city pulse beneath her. The battle wasn't over. The lawsuit would be long and the noise would get louder before it quieted, but for the first time she felt the shift, not just in headlines, but in truth. Curtis had hit her in public, and the world had finally hit back. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as reporters scribbled in notepads, camera crews angled their lenses, and supporters filled the gallery shoulder to shoulder. For weeks, the city of Brookridge had simmered beneath a boiling point. Now, all eyes were on courtroom 4B, where the civil trial of Tamara Green versus Curtis Denton and the city of Brookridge was finally underway. Tamara sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight, her expression composed. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer, the same shade as her hospital scrubs, a deliberate choice. She wanted the jury to remember who she was, not just what she had endured. A nurse, a citizen, a woman whose dignity had been publicly assaulted and whose story had finally demanded space in a system designed to overlook it. Next to her sat Jordan Keene, sharp-eyed and methodical, flipping through her opening notes with a quiet intensity. On the other side of the courtroom, Curtis Denton sat beside his lawyer, Rick Mathers, an aging, well-paid defense attorney known for spinning misconduct into misunderstanding. The judge entered. A gavel struck. The room stood still. Jordan rose first. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "you're going to hear a lot over the next several days about duty, about pressure, about perception. But let me ask you to focus on just one thing: impact. Not the excuses, not the uniform, not the badge. The impact of a man who struck a woman in public with no provocation and then tried to silence her voice when she refused to stay down. She spoke without drama, but with surgical precision, laying out the facts. The slap. The retaliation, the attempted gaslighting, the vandalism, the public smear campaign, and finally, the ripple effect. Jordan concluded with a pause, then added, "When a person uses their authority as a weapon, they do more than harm a single individual. They corrode public trust. They dismantle safety, and that's what we're here to hold accountable." Mathers stood to deliver the defense's opening. He adjusted his tie, smiled softly at the jury, and launched into a well-rehearsed monologue. Officer Denton has served his community for over 2 decades. He's responded to fires, robberies, domestic abuse calls. He's made mistakes, yes. He's human, but he did not assault Mrs. Green out of hatred or prejudice. He reacted under pressure to a situation that escalated unexpectedly. Then came the kicker. She was not struck unprovoked. There was yelling, there was tension, there were words exchanged we may never fully understand. But Officer Denton did not seek out this conflict. He tried to leave it. Tamara didn't blink. She'd expected this strategy. She also expected that before long they'd try to put her on trial instead. The first day brought 2 key witnesses, the store security guard and a bystander who had filmed the altercation. The security guard confirmed Tamara had entered the store moments after the confrontation, shaken but composed. She didn't scream, she didn't rant, she just asked for paper towels to clean her cheek. The juror in seat number 4, a young Latina teacher, nodded quietly at that. Then came Jaden Cross, the teenager who had live-streamed the slap. "I was like standing by the vending machines when I saw it go down," he explained. He just snapped. Like, for no reason. She didn't even raise her voice before that. He just slapped her. "Were you live on your account at the time?" Jordan asked. "Yeah, Instagram Live, like 800 people saw it before it even finished." "And what happened after she slapped him back?" Jaden smiled faintly. The whole lot went silent. Like everyone just froze. She didn't run, she didn't flinch. She just stared him down. That night, Tamara walked out of the courtroom to flashing bulbs and raised phones. She didn't speak to the press, not yet. Her statement would come from the stand, when it mattered most. Back at her apartment, her younger brother Malik was waiting. He'd flown in from Portland the night before, determined to support her in person. "You good?" he asked, handing her a glass of water. Tamara sank into the couch with a tired sigh. "As good as someone being cross-examined by lawyers who think I should have just smiled and backed away." Malik smirked. "Yeah, well, they picked the wrong sister for that." She chuckled softly, the first time she'd laughed all week, but it didn't last long. Her phone lit up again. This time a voicemail, anonymous, robotic voice, just 5 words. "You should have stayed quiet." She stared at the screen, jaw tight. "They're scared," Malik said, peering over her shoulder. "You hit a nerve." Tamara didn't respond, but she saved the message. She'd reported in the morning, let them try, let them push. She wasn't afraid anymore. The cameras were rolling, the people were watching. And tomorrow, she would take the stand. She wouldn't just speak her truth, she would deliver it. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Tamara Green adjusted the cuff of her sleeve and inhaled once, steady and deep. The witness stand was just 10 feet away, but it felt like a mile. Every step she was about to take would be dissected, questioned, framed, and reframed. Her walk, her voice, her tone, her face. This was more than testimony. It was survival. Judge Mitchell, a calm but assertive black woman in her 60s, looked up from her notes. "Ms. Green, you may take the stand." Tamara rose. The clicks of her heels echoed in the silence. No sound but her footsteps and the flutter of legal pads as jurors readied themselves. She was sworn in, seated, and met Jordan Keene's gaze. Her attorney offered a subtle nod. "Ms. Green," Jordan began, "can you tell us where you were on the afternoon of March 17th? Tamara's voice came low but clear. "At South Hills Grocery, picking up food for my neighbor. She'd just had surgery." "And were you expecting to see Officer Denton there?" "No." "I'd never seen him before." "What happened after you parked?" "He pulled up behind me fast, nearly clipped my bumper, got out. Started yelling about me taking his spot." "Did he identify himself as an officer?" "No, not until later. At first he was just a man yelling at me." Jordan stepped slightly to the side so Tamara could address the jury. "What did he say to you?" Tamara's jaw tightened, her voice steadying. "He said, 'You people think you can take whatever you want.' Called me arrogant, loud. Asked if I even had a license. He kept stepping closer like he was trying to intimidate me." "Did you say anything back?" "I apologized. Told him I didn't see his car. Tried to walk away." "And then?" Tamara turned toward the jury. "He slapped me. Open palm. Right across the face." Gasps rippled across the room. Jurors stiffened. Two women in the gallery reached for each other's hands. Jordan took a slow breath. "And what did you do?" Tamara didn't blink. "I slapped him back." "Why?" "Because I wasn't going to let someone, anyone, hit me and walk away like it meant nothing." "I didn't attack him. I defended myself." Jordan nodded. "Did you raise your voice?" "No." "Threaten him?" "No." "Physically block his path?" Tamara's voice sharpened. "He blocked mine." Jordan let the pause linger. "What did you feel when it happened?" Tamara's voice wavered just slightly, then steadied again. "Shock. Embarrassment, but mostly, I felt erased, like in his eyes, I didn't even count as a person." "Thank you," Jordan said gently, then turned toward the judge. No further questions. The courtroom remained hushed as Rick Mathers stood, straightening his tie. He approached the stand slowly, the air growing colder with each step. "Ms. Green," he began, "I'm sorry for what you experienced, but I'd like to ask, did you consider walking away instead of responding?" Tamara raised an eyebrow. "Walking away from what?" "A public assault?" "I mean, after he struck you, before you hit him back." "So I should have absorbed it quietly." Mathers hesitated. "I'm asking if you thought about de-escalating the situation." Tamara leaned forward slightly. "Sir, I was never escalating anything. I was parking my car. He chose violence." "I chose to respond." "But you could have let it go." "No, because if I let that go, it doesn't stop with me. It keeps happening." A murmur of agreement swept through the gallery. Judge Mitchell gave a light tap of her gavel. "Order!" Mathers tried to recover. "Let's talk about your reaction afterward." "The vandalism. You allege he scratched your car. Did you see him do it?" "No. But I found a police-issued challenge coin near my back tire, a very specific one he carries." "And that proves what?" Tamara's voice didn't rise, but the chill in it was unmistakable. "It proves he wanted to mark me. To send a message." Mathers stepped back. No further questions. Tamara descended the stand in silence, but no one in the courtroom saw her as silent. They saw her as powerful. As Tamara returned to her seat, heads turned to watch her. Not out of pity, out of respect. Her words had landed, and not even the defense's deflection could unmake what had just been seen and heard. Judge Mitchell leaned toward the microphone. "The court will take a 15-minute recess. We will reconvene for closing arguments." The gavels sounded once. People rose, some whispering to each other, some shaking their heads at what they had just witnessed. In the hallway outside, reporters were already filing their updates. One news anchor whispered to the camera, "Today's testimony may have turned the tide in a case that's come to symbolize a national debate about race, power, and police conduct." Back inside, Detective Calhoun, who had been helping quietly in the background as a liaison from Internal Affairs, approached Jordan Keene at the plaintiff's table. "We just pulled Denton's disciplinary file," he said in a hushed tone. Internal Affairs had received 3 prior complaints about excessive force. 2 of them were dismissed without follow-up, but the third, it was from a Hispanic teen. Almost the same pattern: parking dispute, verbal provocation. Then a physical shove. Jordan's eyes narrowed. "Is there a statement on record? Filed, signed, time-stamped, and a note that Denton requested to have it sealed under internal arbitration." It never reached the prosecutor's office. Jordan looked over at Tamara. "This changes everything." When court resumed, Judge Mitchell addressed the attorneys. "I've been informed there is additional relevant material from the Internal Affairs Division. Counselor Keene, do you intend to introduce it?" Jordan stood. "We do, Your Honor. The document speaks directly to a pattern of behavior by Officer Denton that undermines his credibility as a witness and as a defendant." Granger stood, visibly tense. "Objection. That document was not submitted prior to today." Judge Mitchell's voice was cool and unbothered. Overruled. "The defense was aware of these prior allegations. You chose not to disclose them. Let the document be entered into evidence." As the file was projected onto the courtroom's monitor, the jury leaned forward again. 3 incidents, 3 moments that looked far too similar. Brad Denton. Off-duty, short temper, a tendency to escalate instead of walk away. One juror, a black woman in her late 30s, closed her eyes briefly and exhaled. Another, a white man with a thick notebook, scribbled furiously. Then came the shocker. Jordan approached the front again. "The young man involved in the 3rd incident is willing to testify. He's in the hallway." He came forward after seeing the viral video of Ms. Green. He said, and I quote, "I stayed silent because I thought no one would believe me. But now I want to speak." Judge Mitchell looked over the courtroom. "Bring him in." The doors opened slowly. A tall, lean boy entered, no older than 17. He wore a school hoodie and walked nervously to the witness stand. His name was Carlos Mejia. Under oath, Carlos recounted the day Denton cornered him at a gas station over a supposed stolen item. There had been no arrest, no charge, just an accusation, a rough shove, and a threat that left Carlos too afraid to tell his parents. "But I never forgot his face," Carlos said, "and when I saw him hit that woman, I knew it wasn't just me." The defense did not cross-examine. They couldn't. The moment had already landed. After the boy stepped down, silence fell across the courtroom once more. The truth was no longer just Tamara's. It belonged to others too, and each one made the story stronger. Later that afternoon, in the final minutes of the day, as the court prepared to adjourn again, Officer Brad Denton's own attorney leaned over to him and whispered something under his breath. Brad's shoulders slumped, because even he now understood this wasn't just a trial. This was the moment everything unraveled. Not just his case, his career, his image, his power. And when Judge Mitchell announced that closing arguments would begin the next morning, everyone knew that the defense would be entering the last round already cornered. The truth had been spoken, the mask had cracked, and for Brad Denton, the countdown to accountability had already begun. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by a fresh wave of media vans and protest signs. Overnight, the clip of Carlos Mejia's surprise testimony had gone viral. TikTokers were stitching Tamara's confrontation with Denton alongside Carlos's quiet voice describing his own humiliation. Twitter threads dissected the patterns. Instagram reels layered her slap with commentary about race, power, and dignity. But inside the courtroom, none of that mattered. At least not to the 12 jurors seated in a row, hands folded, waiting for the final arguments to begin. Tamara sat beside Jordan, her suit pressed, her back straight, but her hands were cold in her lap. She stared ahead, not at Denton, not at the crowd, but at the judge's bench, like it was the only fixed point in the room. Jordan leaned in. "We're here. We made it." She nodded once, her lips tightening. Judge Mitchell entered, and the room stood. She settled behind her bench, adjusted her glasses, and spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we will hear final statements from both the prosecution and defense. You will then begin deliberations. As always, I remind you to weigh the evidence, not the noise outside this courtroom. Proceed." Granger rose first. His suit was immaculate, his hair carefully parted, but something in his voice had lost its shine. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, hands steepled together, "you've seen emotion, you've seen headlines, but this courtroom isn't about headlines. It's about facts." He paced slowly, methodically. "Yes, Officer Denton struck Ms. Green. No one disputes that. The defense does not deny what occurred. But I ask you, what led to that moment? What pressure, what confusion?" He turned to the jury, gaze direct. "Was it wrong?" "Yes, but was it criminal? Was it hate-driven? Was it an act of racism, or was it a man pushed to the edge, reacting poorly but not maliciously?" He let the question hang in the air. He regrets his actions deeply. But this court cannot try a man for public perception. It must try him for law. And with that he sat, shoulders a bit lower than the day before. Then Jordan stood, calm, confident. "Ready." He walked to the center of the room and paused. Let the silence build. "Tamara Green is not on trial," he said, "but for days she's been treated like she is, picked apart, questioned, as if her humanity had to be earned." He turned to the jury. "Let's talk facts." She parked her car. She exited calmly. A man she didn't know, an off-duty cop, approached her with aggression, with slurs, with escalating threats, and when she stood her ground, he hit her. Jordan's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. This wasn't about confusion. This wasn't about a bad day. This was about entitlement, about a man who believed his badge gave him permission to decide who deserved respect, who could exist in public space, who could stand and who must kneel. He gestured toward the evidence table. "You've seen the videos, you've read the report. You heard Carlos Mejia, 17 years old, describe how the same man used intimidation to silence him, and you saw what Denton did to Tamara's car. Vandalism, retaliation, all while knowing the law would likely shield him." Jordan stepped closer to the jury rail. "Ask yourself, if there hadn't been video, would any of this have come to light? If Tamara hadn't fought back, would anyone believe her? If Carlos had stayed quiet, how many others would never have been heard?" He let that question land. This isn't about a bad moment. It's about a pattern of abuse, of unchecked power, and of a system that allowed it until now. Jordan stepped back. The law isn't just for the privileged. It's not a costume you put on with a uniform. It is a contract, one that says no one is above it. He paused once more. Find him guilty, because justice requires more than regret. It requires accountability. and with that, he returned to his seat. Judge Mitchell looked to the jury. "You have heard the arguments. You have the evidence. You may now deliberate." The bailiff gestured, and the jurors stood, filing silently into the chamber. As the heavy doors closed behind them, the courtroom exhaled all at once. Tamara dropped her head into her hands for a moment, then lifted it slowly. Jordan placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "It's out of our hands now," he said. But deep down, they both knew. The truth had already spoken. Now it was just a matter of whether the system was ready to listen. The jury deliberated for just under 2 hours. Not because the evidence was unclear, but because the weight of what they were about to decide demanded silence, reflection, and precision. Behind those closed doors, 12 strangers reviewed every second of video, every line of testimony, and every painful truth they had heard over the last several days. Tamara sat still in the courtroom, her phone silenced in her pocket, though it buzzed almost constantly. Outside, the courthouse steps were now filled with supporters holding signs. "Justice for Tamara. No badge above the law. Black women deserve peace." Inside, the doors finally creaked open. The room snapped back into attention. Judge Mitchell returned to the bench. The jury filed in, solemn and focused, not a single glance at the defense table, only forward. The clerk took the paper from the foreperson and handed it to the judge, who read it silently, her eyes unmoving. Then, with the formality the moment demanded, she nodded. "Will the defendant please rise?" Officer Curtis Denton stood. Stiff, pale, his lawyer stood beside him, arms folded, face unreadable. The clerk read, "In the matter of the People versus Curtis Denton on the count of assault with intent to intimidate, we find the defendant guilty." A breath left Tamara's chest, quiet but deep. "On the count of criminal vandalism motivated by bias, we find the defendant guilty." From behind, a gasp. Then silence. "And on the count of obstruction of justice through false statements and abuse of authority, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom did not cheer. It didn't erupt. But the silence that followed held something stronger than noise. It held justice. Judge Mitchell looked to Denton. "Mr. Denton, you have been found guilty on all counts. Effective immediately, your badge and certification are revoked. You will be remanded into custody pending sentencing." The bailiff stepped forward and placed the cuffs on his wrists. This time, the clink of metal didn't sound like authority. It sounded like accountability. Denton's face remained stoic, but in his eyes was something unmistakable: disbelief. The system that had protected him for years had finally turned its eyes back on him. He looked across the room to Tamara, but she wasn't looking back. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She was simply whole again. After the courtroom cleared, Tamara stood on the courthouse steps. The crowd parted like water around her. Cameras snapped. Microphones reached. But she raised her hand and spoke into the noise. "I didn't ask to be a symbol," she said, "but I refuse to be a target. What happened to me happens to too many women, too many people who are expected to stay silent, to accept harm just because the person hurting them wears a badge or holds power." She looked out across the crowd. This wasn't just about a slap. This was about dignity, about the right to exist without being seen as a threat. She paused, her voice steadied. "We can't change what happened to me, but we can make sure it matters, that it means something. That others feel seen, heard, and protected. If one person watches what happened and finds the courage to speak up, then none of this was in vain." A young girl standing near the front wiped a tear from her eye. Back at her apartment that night, Tamara opened her phone. Thousands of messages. One from an officer, anonymous, who simply wrote, "I'm sorry, you changed something." Another from a teacher, "My students watched your speech." They asked what justice meant. I said, "Her." And one from a woman in Detroit. I was slapped too. No one believed me. Until today. Tamara sat in the dark for a long moment, letting it all in, the pain, the fear, the truth, and finally, the change. The next day, the department announced internal reforms. Bias training became mandatory. An independent review board was formed. Officer misconduct investigations could now be opened by public complaint. None of it erased the slap, but it ensured it wouldn't be ignored. Tamara didn't disappear after the trial. She joined a statewide task force on civilian oversight. She spoke at community colleges and town halls, not to relive her story, but to remind others that their story matters too. Because change doesn't come from silence. It comes from someone, somewhere choosing to stand. And now, to you, yes, you watching this, what would you do if no one else stood up? Would you speak? Would you fight back? Would you believe your voice could shake a system? If Tamara's journey moved you, even for a second, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories that reveal power, justice, and the people brave enough to face them. Because justice doesn't begin in a courtroom, it begins with truth. And truth begins when someone chooses to say, "Enough."